Okay, distinguished guests, distinguished colleagues, dear Selçuk and my dear friend Hakan Türkçapar. Today we will have a discussion session. So of course we will not be arguing. It will be only a discussion. I sent my presentations to Hakan before, and he prepared his answers beforehand. And early in the morning we had our breakfast together, so we are ready for a discussion session. So, why did I become interested in such a topic? Starting early on my career, when I started out my career, I became interested in epistemology and psychiatry. I was looking for answers to the questions whether philosophy intersects with psychiatry, and what is knowledge, and how can we know something for real. These were the questions that I was looking for answers. And I also published a book titled Cultural Analysis. In that specific book, I did not solely focus on CBT, but today I will take you through to this topic. So, Bruce Walpole is the author of this book, The Great Psychotherapy Debate. Everybody won and everybody was awarded. It's a famous dodo bird decision, and this decision is being discussed in this book. It's one of the short stories of Alice in Wonderland. As a matter of fact, this issue has been discussed for the last 30 or 40 years among psychotherapists. So which aspect is more predominant? This is being discussed recently. So cognitive behavioral therapy has started to be very trendy very recently, and it has turned out to be a golden standard. When we take a look at the principles of CBT, we see that it is focused on today and now, and it has a structural approach. It aims to reduce symptoms in general, also to identify and become aware of their negative automatic thoughts, irrational thoughts, gaining harmony and improving more successful strategies. Coping strategies are the main principles of CBT, based on a type of hyper-rationality. So it's a system that has been founded upon the ideal of over-rationalization. So there can be denial of the facts. When you look at the subject from a theoretical point of view, some aspects can be disregarded by the patient. And no matter how many RCT and randomized studies are being conducted, more intuitive approaches can be left behind when it comes to CBT. The living experience, real case examples can come to the forefront within the framework of CBT, and by taking the facts reality out of their context and the reasons, the history of a specific context, the memory of human being may be disregarded by the psychotherapists. Regarding effectiveness of CBT, of course, phobias, anxiety disorders, symptom controls, and managing symptoms, all these areas, I think, are very appropriate for CBT therapies, and CBT is the most effective in those areas. However, in areas such as emotional gaps, emotional emptiness, we know what CBT refers to very well. There are certain approaches which intersect cognitive therapies and CBT, but CBT, as we know of it, as a gatekeeper, unfortunately, is not sufficient to understand and analyze deeper mechanisms of human mind. Of course, the criticisms that I have made and that I will be making should be taken into account based on classical literature, because it is also under evolution and there will be different approaches emerging in the upcoming period. So, such discussions are also heard quite often in the British media. There is an article from The Guardian, Oliver Burkeman wrote it. CBT is 50% effective in depression treatment, according to this article. And another article titled Revenge of Freud, and psychoanalytic therapies are considered as equal to CBT, and it is discussed whether CBT is losing its reputation. Well, what are the limitations of CBT? First of all, it has a reductionist view. So, when you only focus on rationality, you will reduce the life of human beings and you will disregard emotional side of the people. There is an overemphasis on rationality in CBT, and changing irrational beliefs will not be the same for each person. We should keep this in mind when it comes to CBT. It wouldn't be possible for everyone to get rid of their problems through the same methods and ways. Subjective experience will be different, will be distinctive for each person. In CBT, we tend to disregard individuality of people. Especially, there are certain people with high intuitions, highly intuitive people, and we may disregard their feelings in CBT. CBT can be very effective in some instances. However, there can be some missing points when it comes to internal living of people, their experiences and intuitions. As you know, we've been through a modernization process as human beings, and we made a distinction between our own memory and history, and as singular people, we established ourselves. The more we make this distinction, the larger the effect of CBT becomes. So there is a belief on the facts and materials, so CBT takes place of more deeper approaches very recently, and experts unfortunately are being more dominant and they are given more authority by the patients according to CBT. So it's like dominance of the experts. Dominance of the experts. So we mentioned simplification of psyche. If we follow CBT approach, will we disregard more deeper aspects, more deeper emotions of people? The human memory and the human experience are reflected, may be reflected upon the structuring of the symptoms, emerging of the symptoms, because we are wounded and we get harmed, we may have problems during our childhood, we may have difficult times. So wouldn't it be possible for us to develop certain symptoms due to our past experiences? Instead of reducing symptoms, would it be more correct to look at signs of symptoms? You can reduce symptoms, but these symptoms may be replaced by other more aggressive symptoms. And reducing symptoms, solely symptoms, may cause emergence of bigger gaps. When we take a look at the therapy relationship, well, psychotherapy on its own is a relationship between a person who is seeking for treatment and another person, an expert who is trying to treat this person. And in this equation, we see that the therapist is the one who gives instructions, such as prescribing medications and telling the person what to do. So my question is whether such an attitude will hinder the growth of this person, of this client. There are some aha moments in which you realize what lies behind each behavior or each symptom. So by making some proposals to reduce symptoms, would it hinder this aha moment process? Discovering the reality is another problem. Some other therapies are analyzing psychological symptoms in a more detailed manner, and they try to go deeper into the matters. Other therapies trying to seek for the real reasons behind each behavior or symptom, which can be more effective than CBT. Again, activating subconscious processes according to a certain belief, activating subconscious beliefs through CBT is another approach, but according to some researchers, this wouldn't be possible, and it's only up to the person to change this person's situation. So the rationalist ethos, science progresses rationally based on evidence, and when better ideas come to the forefront, weaker ones are eliminated. And CBT adopted from this rhetoric and stipulated, okay, I believe in this and I am providing empirical evidence, and I am proposing certain data to you. I'm providing certain data to you. By doing so, the power dynamics between the patient and the therapist is being disregarded. This empirical evidence paradigm is very interesting indeed, I put a picture on my slide. So, what are these sticks called? Chopsticks that you see in the picture. Okay, chopsticks. Can you drink soup? Can you eat soup with chopsticks? If everyone holds chopsticks, if you give chopsticks to everyone, let's say you cooked pasta and soup at the same time and you instruct your guest to eat the soup with chopsticks.
Araştırma protokollerinde ki
In research protocols,
yöntemlerin baştan RCT protokollerin baştan
RCT protocols may be identified wrong at the beginning, so many therapies are being disregarded from the very beginning, and therapy methods are trying to be resembled to the CBT methods. So, there is a study that I want to share with you. In Pursuit of Truth, a critical examination of meta-analysis of cognitive behavior therapy. I want to take a look at it. The final sentence, take a look at the final sentence. Meta-analytic evidence for the superiority of CBT in the three meta-analyses are non-existent or weak, accordingly. So, by collecting analysis of various studies and making a meta-analysis, the superiority claim will be wrong, accordingly. I will come back to this later on. Kujipers made certain studies, and I will move on very quickly. According to one study, while a total of 42% of patients receiving CBT responded to the treatment, the remission rate was only 36%. Even in the research populations, 64% did not go into remission. Can we call such a therapy a golden standard? There were 87 meta-analysis studies comparing CBT with other psychotherapy methods, and it found no significant difference or dominance. Jefferson wrote this article and published it in World Psychiatry in 2023. This is the first meta-analysis. This is not the first meta-analysis study that shows dominance of CBT. There are many others. So what about long-term effects? In a period of 24 months, when you follow up the patient throughout 24 months, the effect size was no longer significant according to Junifer's study. So the dimension of the effect seems to be bigger in the Western countries. There is a higher risk of bias for this. CBT, the effect of CBT is claimed to be reduced in time according to certain studies. We should take it into account, and I will go into detail later on. And there's very interesting methodological difficulties, such as including MRD or not. So it's very difficult to sort out the methodology by when we implement studies about CBT. Should we collect all meta-analysis, or how can we be sure whether CBT is more dominant when we compare it with other therapies? And it will be very problematic to reach out to conclusions very early on. So, there are better results when it comes to anxiety-related disorders when CBT is administered. According to the research, the results on depression are more positive. According to findings of a study conducted by Bhattacharya,
daha üstündü.
CBT did not prove to be dominant in comparison with other treatments. Haute couture psychotherapy, rather than adopting the approach of one size fits all, therapists should develop their approaches based on individual aspects of every person. I think it will be more fair and just. So, this is not only told by critics of CBT. Acceptance and commitment therapy, a therapy called acceptance and commitment therapy. This school was founded by Stephen Hayes, and Stephen Hayes agrees with this. In his article published in 2017, he says that the changes evolving out of CBT implementation, they emerge before the results of other cognitive therapies. The therapeutic cooperation, the sense of therapeutic cooperation between the client and the therapist is very effective in this regard. And cognitive interventions bring us into suspicion. It makes us suspicious of what method works better. People get well very fast, yes, that's correct, but this becomes before the cognitive therapies are implemented. Changes in cognitive mediators, the beliefs, thoughts presumed to drive symptom change. They don't appear or to precede or to predict improvements in the symptoms, challenging the cognitive model. Isn't it interesting? Let's say you started to administer the therapy before starting out, maybe by establishing the relationship, building rapport with the patient, the change already starts to occur. So I want to show you a very important study, the effects of cognitive behavioral therapy. Johnson and Fribourg are the authors. I will refer to it later on again. In time, CBT studies lost their impact. At the beginning, they were more effective, but later on, other studies started to reveal that CBT is not as effective as it was expected, which brings us to the question whether CBT has a placebo effect or not. Would it be possible for people to believe in the future, to believe in the effectiveness of the CBT therapy? Would it be the reason for them to get better at the beginning? But they started to show symptoms later on as the impact, the repetition, the propaganda, the advocacy wore off. Would it be possible for us to assume this? Because there is a reduction in the efficiency of the CBT therapy on some patients. So what can we learn from this meta-analysis? In unipolar depression, the effectiveness of CBT has steadily decreased over time. New studies don't find CBT as effective as it was in the past. The argument is not that CBT has lost its effect in depression and become useless, but when we take a look at the new studies conducted on the same subject, it is found as not being dominant over other therapies. However, there's a meta-analysis and other studies concerning effectiveness of CBT in anxiety disorders, and it is still found as effective when it comes to anxiety disorders. So in my remaining time, how many minutes do we have? 15 minutes more. Okay, very quickly, I will take a look at the philosophical side of the subject. Behaviorism reduced humans to machines, and cognitivism actually advance this idea.
Odağı
The economic focus is quite prominent. Everything must be scalable in this economy. We are facing it. And everything must be absolutely interpreted into the scientific language. And in social sciences, we should have a rational foundation according to this understanding. And there are no values that the human beings should be loyal to or dedicated to. There is no one in this model. And the behaviorist model considers humans as a machine. When there is an effect, you see the reaction, and there is an illusion, which illusion against evolution. And when you are in a life, some of the experiences that we face are ignored. And actually, the conditioning of oneself is not realized. It claims that we can choose our thoughts because thoughts trigger the emotions, and we can select the thoughts. And each of us is hyper rational beings and target the symptoms, challenge the thoughts, and replace the thoughts. And thought versus emotion here. And they are distinct things, and whether they are interrelated, is it possible? If a thought is not positive, if it doesn't trigger happiness, these are problematic, and therefore a rational cage is our barriers surrounding us. The emotions are problem. Sometimes the emotions are problematic, and there may not be another reason. We need to replace them according to this model. The therapeutic report considers the human beings as a whole, so the existential problems are ignored here. There must be an event, it will cause cognition, and cognition will cause emotions, and the same order is valid for every person. This is a universal paradigm. However, between the human beings, there are some variances, and the emotional responses may vary per person. But this idea is totally rejected. And the person is decontextualized. Your culture, your economic challenges, politic challenges are minimized in the agenda of this model, and we it's recommends that it claims that we are living in a sociological vacuum, in a social gap, and it avoids emotions. Everything is based on ration, and in that sense, as a legacy to Cartesianism, because the emotions and minds, soul and intellect, between these there is a absolute distinction for human beings. Human beings are handled some kind of mechanic things. The negative emotions are unnecessary and to be avoided. And there is a shallow rational idea that we need to pursue, and control obsession and control obsession. The symptoms are focused, therefore, medicalization of the human life is the target, and also the life problems that we encounter sometimes are causing some disorders, and they should be handled as disorders according to this model. However, human beings are quite complicated, and human beings have a rich inner world. Our life experiences, our stories are quite different from each other. Even if we face similar events, we respond in different manners. Therefore, if this is a world, we are mutually dependent. We are in such a conceptual bond. Empathetic understanding is indispensable component of psychotherapy. This listening makes you understand the experiences and requires a deep listening but not judging, and the human is handled as a whole from a holistic perspective. If we avoid human emotions, if we do not deal with them, we will ignore the human depth, and we will not notice the richness of the experiences. And there will be a standard human beings. Everyone will be living in boxes, and the human beings will be simplified then. And in that sense, the watchdog CBT and the scientific positivism it is based should be criticized. I mean, the numeric evaluation and also ignoring the existential and subjective dimensions must be criticized. And also, CBT gives a superior role to the therapist, and therapist is some kind of savior to the person, and this creates a dominance, a hierarchy. Therefore, this is agent of social control, or CBT-like treatments, or just like in the United Kingdom, there was economist Bruce Layard. In order to minimize unhappiness, hundreds of people should be treated with CBT, he claimed, and some of the states in those times he was this control spy of some of the states in those times. And there were also some alternative uprisings, like narrative approaches, which do not focus on the symptoms but the values, and it is against simplifying human beings to the symptoms. And mindfulness is also focusing on the mind, and rationalism is not a target. Existential therapy is also attached more importance to the existential grounds of human beings. And CBT is also criticized in the sense that it was brought by a white man, and it may somehow conflict with the local culture, and there are some gaps in its localization. Only the individual and Western values must not be imposed, and local and traditional healing practices shouldn't be dismissed in that sense.
Evet, rasyonel ve non-rasyonel
Rational and non
bir araya
rational
getirmesi lazım. İnsanların
knowledge must be
farklı
harmonized,
ince bağlantı kurduğunu
because there is mutual communication between the human beings which must be underlined, and the human beings must be handled within their own self and depth. Sometimes suffering causes an awakening, sometimes it helps us explore ourselves, and sometimes it causes breaks in our identity. And being is our doing in this world, and it is also an intuitional thing in psychotherapy, and the technique and method is inferior to presence. Therefore, we exist for each other, and this is the reality which may change our notions in the psychotherapy. Not fixing something, but meeting something with unconditional love, and also embracing all parts of human beings without judgment will be a better and basic psychotherapy method. And there are some third way movements in psychotherapy, acceptance and commitment therapy. This is also based on the values. It doesn't try to change the suffer or avoid the suffer. It is acceptance and try to evolve it to somewhere else. How many minutes do I have? Is it over? Okay. Then let me wrap up.
depresyon ve anksiyete
Depression and anxiety.
nasıl örgütlendi?
These are not only individual pathologies, but these may be the products of the culture or the society that we live in. And because of wrong thoughts, we do not go into depression, but sometimes it's the conditions that cause this depression. Maybe a broader culture must be taken into consideration, and the external culture effect on the patients must be considered. Symptom is a way of communication. We shouldn't forget it. And behind the symptom, there are some hidden meanings that we need to understand. Symptoms shows us something, and we need to be aware of this. And the social actors and also the cultural actors must be well noticed. And at last but not the least, there are some limitations of CBT, and this is focusing totally on symptom. Cultural and social factors are ignored in CBT, and the subjective experiences are unvalidated, and the power dynamics in a relation are not cared in CBT. These are all the limitations of CBT. There may be some alternatives to this. Let me talk about a few sources. This is about cognitive behavioral procedures and existential concerns recommended by Menzies. Is a good source. And this is also the criticism of CBT is a in-depth criticism from a sociological perspective is a strict criticism. Actually, for CBT, it is telling that the CBT is misused here by Ferhat Dalal. And by the same group, there are also three other books published. I have the first one. I do not know the others, but these are the improved forms of the same book. This is against and for CBT. On one side, there are some criticisms to CBT, and there are the supporters, and the later versions of the book is critically engaging CBT and why not CBT. These are enriched by different authors. Thank you very much for your attention.